This is Democracy,
a podcast about the people of the United States.
A podcast about citizenship.
About engaging with politics and the world around you.
A podcast about educating yourself on today's important issues
and how to have a voice in what happens next.
Welcome to This is Democracy. I'm Zachary Suri. Today we are joined by a scholar living at the center of perhaps one of the most consequential confrontations of our moment. That is, of course, the weeks-long standoff between anti-ICE protesters in Minneapolis and the various immigration enforcement wings of the Department of Homeland Security. A standoff that, unfortunately, as we all know, has left at least two protesters, Renee Good and Alex Pretty, dead. Joining us is Professor David Aiona Chang. Professor Chang is a historian at the University of Minnesota. He studies Indigenous people, colonialism, borders, and migration in Hawaii and North America, focusing especially on the histories of Native American and Native Hawaiian people, as well as the history of social movements in the United States. Professor Chang, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. We are, of course, also joined, as always, by Professor Jeremi Suri. Jeremi, thank you for joining us. Today, for the first time in a while, we will start not with a speech or an essay, but with an original poem that I wrote. This is called Nicollet Avenue, which is the street where Alex Pretty was killed. At night, when the street is sleeping, it tosses and turns, ice cracking, sounds of agony softly rising from the salt. I think the street has nightmares, and I think it remembers the dead, the bullets that bounced off its skin and buried themselves in another's. At night, when the street is sleeping, it feels the boots that stomped across to the tune of swinging rifles, beating time on its surface like a song. I think the street is singing in its sleep, a dirge for the dead and departed, for the cold press of cold flesh it remembers too well, waking up last Sunday with bloodstains. So, Professor Chang, would you be able to tell us, just from your experience, what it's been like to live in the Twin Cities at this moment, to live through what all of us around the country and around the world are seeing on the news every day?
Thank you for asking that. It has been, everybody's experiences in the cities is going to be different. And I'm speaking to you, of course, as, a person with a lot of privilege. I'm a university professor. I have a lot of privileges that soften my life, if you will. At the same time, it's a very, very intense period in the Twin Cities. It's been a time, though, where I would emphasize it's been both a time of terror and sadness, but also a time of inspiration and hope. The terror and sadness are obvious to anyone around the globe, of course, because they see that federal forces who are heavily armed and undertrained and very much under-supervised, if you will, and there's very and under-regulated, are terrorizing our neighbors and our communities, arresting people, taking them into custody, abducting them around the clock. And we're talking about hundreds and hundreds of people. The numbers that ICE is giving out can't really be trusted because they're not really backed up with a lot of numbers. But clearly, many, many people are being abducted. Many people have been physically hurt. Many people have been traumatized, and their families as well. At the same time, I do think the national and global media has started to pick up on what is one of the most important parts of this story, and that's the solidarity of the response. That's the loving kindness of the community, the bravery and the courage in responding in ways that are very dramatic for the cameras, such as standing between ICE and someone that they're trying to abduct, and also much quieter, driving kids to high school or dropping off groceries or necessary supplies at people's homes. So that response is profoundly inspiring. It gives me great hope, not only for this movement, but also for other for the political work, which is also, of course, the human work of society and community that we'll have to do in the coming years.
That makes sense. Could you explain to us, especially from the perspective of a historian, where you think this solidarity movement, as you described it, this movement against ICE in Minneapolis, came from? It seems to me as an outside observer, like Minneapolis has been at the center of some of the most consequential social movements of our time. Why is that, and why this moment too?
I think that I'd like to look to multiple roots. Like most things, they come from multiple. Most things that are strong come from multiple roots. One of that is the very strong and specific social roots of Minnesota, as well as the Twin Cities itself. There is a strong history of civic national engagement here, with the notion that the United States is a nation of people committed to certain ideals. Those ideals are enshrined in certain documents, and those documents ensure certain rights and set up certain processes that must be followed. There is a strong commitment to this idea here. And despite its limitations, this kind of liberal nationalism, right now we're seeing what it can do in certain moments when institutions, processes, and the idea of equality under the law becomes threatened. That's combined with a culture that has both religious and secular roots. That, everything from Lutheranism to Trotskyism, that has been very strong in Minnesota, the Northern Plains, and Minneapolis, St. Paul for a very long time. And we can see this in the strong religious and church-based movements that help to create the welcoming environment that sponsored refugees from around the world after the American Secret War in Southeast Asia, that welcomed people from East Africa, that welcomed people from Korea after the Korean War, et cetera. This created a population that was, diverse in a very specific way. And very globalized in a very specific way, that combined with kind of the labor part of the farmer labor of the DFL, the Democratic Farmer Labor Party, which is the form of the Democratic Party that we have here in the state, which has really strong, very labor left kind of orientations. And that's been important here. And then, so all of that's local, right? And it's been nurtured here. And of course, we're coming here, 5 years after the killing and the uprising following the murder of George Floyd on Chicago Avenue, and that created an idea, a solidarity, many different kinds of ideas, many different kinds of solidarities, where people understood themselves as responsible for the community. One of these ideas and practices, which is very strong here, is that of mutual aid, that we take care of us, that we stand up for us. And you see that in the everyday courage of people simply going around doing humble, simple things to support one another, again, as well as the dramatic things that the cameras capture. All of that comes together with a national environment. We're not the first city doing this, right? So there was Chicago, there was Portland, there was Los Angeles, there's others. And already in those different places, one can find communities come together in order to support. We learned from Chicago. Chicago learned from other cities, right? The proliferation of neighborhood networks, of leaderless movements in order to create a better, safer community, that doesn't come just from us. So, and I do not think it will stop just here either. Unfortunately, this is a national problem, and it will continue in other cities. And I think that we can look forward to a historical moment that we can't entirely anticipate, but it will be different because there is now a genealogy, a continuity of modes of resistance which are drawing upon historical precedent elsewhere.
So David, I wanted you to reflect, if you would, on your students. How has this affected students and others who are obviously engaged with the issues, but also, trying to get on with their lives one way or another?
It's challenging for students. We were allowed to teach in a mixed modality if we needed to, because not all students are feeling comfortable coming to campus for many different reasons. So there's a lot of anxiety, obviously. International students are feeling a particular anxiety, but that's been going on for a while now. So this is a hard time for students, the undergrads, the grads, everything from, the the 19-year-olds to the postdocs, I'd even say, are having a hard time.
And do you find that there's solidarity between the students and the protesters? Are there counter student opinions? How is it affecting that community? I ask in part because there's such a history of student movements related to many of the issues we're concerned with here. You've written a lot about this yourself, and so I wonder how you see this moment in that historical context.
Well, first of all, I'm not in the classroom this semester. So I'm not having that, but I am, communicating a lot with students anyway. I have not heard of counter movements, if you will, like the deport them all now kind of a politics. I haven't encountered or heard tell of such a thing on campus at all.
So you see a pretty uniform perspective from students, and then I would ask you, sort of beyond that, do you see, or is what we're seeing on television, where a polarized environment of ICE and the population of Minneapolis is two separate groups, is that a fair representation of what?
I'm sure that there's more complexity, but that is what's visible. Of course, I'm sure that there are some people are sympathetic, right, to the goals and even perhaps the methods of these federal agents, right? But I have not seen, that's not apparent on the streets. It's not very apparent on opinion columns. It's more in the comments in social media, if you will, and that's certainly available nationwide. And you don't know exactly where that's coming from either. So, but no, it is a very strong response. I think that partly this is something that I wanted to talk about. I thought it'd be interesting also to talk about. It's partly, this feels from here very much like a unilateral federal imposition on a state, and completely ignoring the elected leaders of that state. And so, the mayors of St. Paul and Minneapolis, the governor of Minnesota, our senators, the majority of our delegations are very upset about this force coming from Washington, unbidden, and which refuses resolutely to respond to, explain, transfer documents to the state government at all. So even people who I do think that this creates a real unhappiness, even among people who might be more inclined towards the expulsion of people that they think are here illegally, or they suspect they just don't even want here.
So is it fair, David, to call it an occupation force as a historian? Is that how you would refer to it?
In a legal sense, I doubt that's probably going to fly, right? But I think that's how that it's perceived that way.
That makes sense. Where do you see the protests and the sort of clashes between DHS officials and others going from here? Are they still ongoing? Do you think the Trump administration has effectively backed down on this issue, or how are people perceiving that on the ground?
What's really interesting is, okay, so I can't again speak for all on the ground. I'm not really in a position to do that. What I can say is we don't know if they're starting to back down. It does seem that they started to moderate their discourse, bringing Homan in and moving Bovino out. Seems like a way to try to signal that. At the same time, your guess is as good as mine. What's going to happen in the next 2 weeks, right? Because there's a deliberate opacity here, right? I mean, think about the visuals of the mask, the refusals to explain oneself, the insolence in the face of the judiciary. All of these are of a piece, right? It's a claiming of absolute authority. So therefore, we don't know what their intentions are. And I think that that's very much a part of the politics of what's going on here. It's this strong assertion of unbridled federal power here.
Well, I was going to ask David, what would improve the situation? Obviously, most, or certainly many, if not most, residents of Minneapolis would like ICE just to leave, and I would certainly feel that way if I were there. But what short of that will bring something back to at least civic normality? What would actually get us further along toward that end?
I honestly think that's what has to happen. There needs to be an end to this surge. I think that's what will solve the problem.
Nothing else.
Again, I don't have a crystal ball, right? My specialty is the past, not the but yeah, I do. I think that it's the ending of the surge, which probably does that mean that all immigration courts immediately close and go away? All immigration officials all go away? Probably not, right? But this is not a normal situation. What's going on here, and the people who have control over stopping it are not headquartered here in Minneapolis.
Right. That makes sense. Zachary?
Yeah, as a historian, looking at this moment, something you're personally experiencing, but also something that obviously falls within your area of study. How do you think that this? I mean, obviously, we're not in the business of prediction, but how do you think this moment will be remembered? Is it possible that this will have a larger or outsized impact on immigration discourse in our country, or even thinking only a few months in advance on the election this fall?
I think it will change. Yeah, I think this already is mattering a lot for the upcoming elections this fall, midterm elections. It has Republicans in the state, and I'm sure nationally, quite nervous because it's not a good look, including among some Republicans and including among many people who voted Trump but may not be, if you will, lifelong committed Republicans, and they really need those people. So that's the second half of your question. I forgot the first half, I'm afraid, Zachary.
Sorry, the first half of my question is, how do you think this moment will be remembered by historians for its impact on our...
Well, first of all, somebody very bright, such as yourself, needs to write a dissertation on this. It's going to be a good one. I truly hope that there are academic and non-academic researchers who are thinking about this very question. This is going to be... Well, first of all, I think that if this is done right, it won't be just the streets of Minneapolis, right? Studies of movements such as this, we're going to need to look back at roots, as I was emphasizing to you a few minutes ago, right? Which are national, which are Chicago, which are Portland, which are LA, which are other cities. Place it in the context of other ways of pushing it back against, because this is not, the energy that is behind this is about the ICE surge and the abductions and the brutality of those, but it's also part of a wider, it draws energy and ideas from other recent movements, from the center, from the left, from the center left, right, against the current administration, right? So that's this. I think it's going to be remembered as one of the high points of a broader response in 2020, 2025, 2026. And I have no idea where we're going in the future. It will not be forgotten, though.
Why, David, do you think that in particular, in a way that to me, at least as a historian, echoes Kent State, why do you think these shootings of Robin Good and Alex Pretty, why do you think they've had such power as stories? Because there's clearly been an effort by the administration to tell a different story, to make this out to be a story of domestic terrorism. And in the past, that's had some legs, and it seems to have fallen flat nationally this time. Why do you think that is?
I can think of a number of reasons. For one thing, they came out so quickly with this term domestic terrorist and paid protester and all that stuff. And that's just so patently not true. And so demonstrably not true in the case of Renee Good and Alex Pretty, right? Okay, now they have video that says that Alex got into a scuffle with some agents and kicked at headlights or something like that. That's not a domestic terrorist, right? That's not a domestic terrorist. So they spoke too strong, too quick, and the data is too strong to refute their narrative. On top of that, these are appealing, young-ish white people who are idealistic and good. So in other words, the media narrative on them is cleaner, right? So, I mean, these are not racialized people, right? And so, therefore, their story plays in a certain way. And I want to take nothing away from them, right? I'm just saying that in terms of how media works, they figure in a particular strength. And I think also they are being seen as in some ways emblematic of the Minnesota movement, what's going on in Minnesota. And Minnesota, the upper Midwest, as you know, it occupies a certain kind of image in the American political imaginary, right? Of innocence, of community, and all that sort of a thing. I'm delighted at that, frankly. But at the same time, you can see how that would answer back in a particular way.
Yeah.
They don't look like terrorists, and they look profoundly domestic, the both of them. Right.
Right. And just to focus in on this, because again, as a fellow historian who's written about Kent State, and also the silence around Jackson State, a similar shooting on a college campus where African Americans were shot, race seems to matter here, right? The fact that these were white victims makes it more resonant, you would think, yes?
Yes. And a lot of people, people are trying to say, don't forget, the many, many brown people who've been hurt in this, and black people who've been hurt in this, the hundreds and thousands of people who've been abducted, and all these other things. But it's hard to push back. We've been pushing for a longer historical narrative. I and others have been saying, remember, the Bishop Whipple building is on Fort Snelling, and Fort Snelling is federal land that was involved in a war on the Dakota and the seizing of this region, right? And so there's an effort to create that broader historical context and to try to if you say this is not all about these white faces, right? But it's also about black and brown faces and bodies and voices. We're pushing uphill on that, right?
Yes.
Yeah. I thought I did see your Kent State piece. And I thought that the piece it really struck me that this idea about untrained, really unprepared people with powerful weapons and with authority, that resonates very strongly here. And I'm glad you put that out there. It also made me think about what's very interesting kind of in the history of American politics here is the way that the expected roles that we see from Reconstruction through the Civil Rights Movement between federal and local authority or state authority in some ways are being reversed. We are used to seeing calls to the federal government in order to protect African Americans after enslavement through the Freedoms Bureau, to control the Ku Klux Klan. We see this in the Civil Rights Movement, where you see the Voting Rights Act, right, for example, is very much about we don't trust local authorities, that is state, county, and municipal governments, to protect the rights of racialized people or to protect the rights of the powerless. Therefore, we look to Washington. It's so much the opposite now. Right. And as an American historian, doesn't it make your head spin?
Absolutely. No, as you say, it's a reverse of the relationship in the 1960s and early 70s. And it's sad because it makes me as a historian, David, think if you don't have at least some element of the Justice Department and some element of the executive that is concerned with enforcing federal laws at some level, it's hard to imagine that they'll be enforced fairly, even when you have a competent state government.
It's a delicate time, and we really need the judiciary. Yes,
that's exactly right.
Yeah.
That's exactly right.
I did want to ask, what do you make of the sort of? I know we talked a little bit about why the public outcry after the two killings. I'm curious what you make of the Trump administration's and the president's sort of backing down on this front. It seems like there's been a lot of public outcry about the immigration raids, at least locally in every city that they have surged in. And I'm curious what you make of the way that the Trump administration has responded, or seemingly had to, take back its own responses so quickly. What do you make of that, and what do you think that says about the sort of lasting power of this as a political issue?
It's striking, isn't it? because we're not talking about a big backing down, but any backing down from this administration, any modulation is striking, giving how strident it is and how unapologetic it is, how take no prisoners. It's kind of the Ray Cohn never apologize model is very strong here. I am watching it, and I am hoping that it signals a change in direction, but it definitely signals that they feel that they're afraid to lose support among voters that they need. That's what I think it's about, is that they need the kind of Republicans who are like, well, I'm okay with you up to a point, Mr. President, but, right? And I think that's where we are. And they're trying to hold on to those votes while not appearing, to back down. Right. That's where I think we are. It's an interesting moment.
Yeah, I think just to build on that, David, which you said so well, I think what's happened because of the gross excessive use of force in Minneapolis is that the issue of border security, which Trump is still relatively popular on, at least with some people, that's been lost and has become a discussion instead of brutality and federal overstep. And I would think that Republicans would like it to come back to a discussion of border security, which would mean taking the lens off of Minneapolis.
Yeah, I think that's true.
So David, we generally close with actually a question for Zachary. So I'm gonna do that, and maybe you can react to that if you have anything to say to his answer on this. The question we normally close on is, how are young people reacting to this? Young, aware, intelligent people, the future of our democracy. And Zachary, you're perfect to ask this question of because you've been watching this, but you're also far away. So whereas David can give us both, esteemed historical perspective and a personal view of it, you're watching it from far away as a young person who has some background in these issues and cares obviously, but doesn't have that direct touch of this. So how do you see this, Zachary, and how do you think others like you are seeing what's happening in Minneapolis?
Well, I think a lot of young people, and I think people across the board are sort of reacting in shock to this. I think there are a lot of, I think the public opinion polls and conversations with any young person or any person, period, show the kind of anger or frustration with this moment. I think there are varying degrees of, outrage. Like some people, I think, are outraged at the particular killings of Alex Pretty or Renee Good, or they see those as the thing to be outraged about. I think there are those who are most horrified or most focused on the impact of the deportations on immigrant communities. So I think there are a range of political responses. Here in New Haven, there is a big sort of walkout today in solidarity with Minneapolis. So there are a range of different responses that I think people are engaging in, but I would say I think it's almost universal shock at the shootings of protesters in particular.
David, any last thoughts you want to share? I know you've thought so much about this, and we're so grateful that you've taken the time in such stressful conditions to talk to us. Any words you want to close with?
Oh, thank you. Well, first of all, thank you, but the gratitude is misplaced. I'm not in the front lines here, really, honestly. I do think that there's a lot to take inspiration and hope from here. And I think you're talking about generation and young people. It's not just young people, right? There are grandparents and elders and middle-aged people, but also so many idealistic young people who are just saying, well, I have to help out in some way. And for some people, that means a patrol. For some people, that means blowing whistles. For some people, that means packing food at a food shelf. It means all kinds of things. But looking at that kind of idealism and then hopefully watching it work, that really fills me with hope. It does.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Professor Chang. And thank you, Jeremi, and thank you most of all to our wonderful listeners for joining us for this latest episode of This is Democracy.
This podcast is produced by the Liberal Arts ITS Development Studio
and the College of Liberal Arts at the University of Texas at Austin.
The music in this episode was written and recorded by Scott Holmes.
Stay tuned for a new episode every week.
You can find This is Democracy on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube.
See you next time.